Members of the committee, first of all I would like to introduce ourselves. My name is Farren and I represent Whisky Rock Fisheries Limited, a shellfish export company based in Lough. My colleagues beside me are Paul McLaughlin, Chairman of the Lough Foyle Oyster Subcommittee, who represents the majority of the public oyster fishermen, and James McKinley, who is a fisherman. We jointly are committed to the preservation of the public native oyster industry in Lough Foyle. The native oyster is a species of great economic importance to our fishing, business and local community. It is of particular importance to the Inishowen side of Lough Foyle that ensembles the main oyster fishing fleet in the Foyle catchment area. We would like to thank you for your kind invitation today to discuss grave concerns that we have in relation to the mismanagement of the Loughs Agency, a cross-border body which is co-sponsored by the Irish and UK governments. I would like to note that in the time frame allocated, it will not be possible to cover the full story, but we will do our utmost to discuss this problems briefly. The various issues to be discussed transgressed from 1996 and evolved in 1997 as a result of initiatives laid in foundation by BIM and the Foyle and Carlingford Irish Lights Commission, the latter being the Loughs Agency, in the form of a mussel seed trial that took place between 1997 and 1999. The Loughs Agency was first established in 1999. However, the CEO of the Loughs Agency is the same CEO of the Foyle, Carlingford and Irish Lights Commission that existed in 1997, and the position remains the same to this day. To explain these admissions simply, mussel seed was relayed on top of our public oyster beds. This practice is ongoing and can no longer be tolerated if the native oyster is to survive in Lough Foyle. The existing problem is that these aquaculture adventures are illegal practices which have led to 1. Loss of oyster ground due to relaying of mussel seed, and I quote from an official survey by the Loughs Agency. Allegations that seed mussels have been deposited in areas that were traditionally oyster fishery grounds, especially in the more productive areas, are frequently made. It seems certain that there is substance to these allegations, but they must be viewed in the context of a declining oyster fishing industry. Source C2697, Baseline Shellfish Survey, Lough Foyle, 2007. 2. Introduction of Banamia in 2005, a blood parasite which kills the oysters. This disease can only be introduced through illegal movements of infected native oysters which carry this parasite. I quote, "An investigation into the source of the Banamia ostrea infection concluded that the most likely possible source was an unauthorised movement of mussels from a non-approved zone in the west of Ireland to Lough Foyle, which is reported to have contained oyster spat. However, movement of boats or equipment could also have been a contributing factor." Marine Institute et al. 2006. Source Banamia ostrea and the native oyster Ostrea ageless, a review, August 2007. 3. Signs of invasive alien species from illegal aquaculture, particularly Gigas oysters. Fishermen are now catching this species on oyster grounds. I quote again from the official survey by the Loughs Agency. It was reported that at the start of the native oyster fishing season in September 2005, several Pacific oysters were obtained throughout the beds. They were all of a similar size, about 2 to 3 inches shell length. It is not known where these oysters originated. They may have recruited naturally due to a single successful spawning event. This is unlikely to have been from the extant oyster farm, as triploid oyster seed is used. It is not clear if there will be sufficient broodstock stock, but the fact that the juvenile oysters were so widely distributed and attached to culch, including mussel shell, does suggest that a natural spawning event may well have occurred, in which case this would probably have been in the summer of 2004. Source C2697, Baseline Shellfish Survey, Lough Foyle 2007. The end result is agreed among traditional fishermen and my business that aquaculture is a pest in Lough Foyle. However, had things been done differently in 1996-1997, possibly the current situation could have been averted and we possibly would not be sitting here today. As you know, the Loughs Agency currently regulate the Lough Foyle oyster industry. We now want this overturned as they have treated my business and the fishermen with contempt and duress. They have ignored all advice we have given them in relation to how this fishery should be managed. Recent evidence of this can be given and is taken from the extract of minutes of a meeting which took place in the Loughs Agency headquarters in Farren on Monday 26 August 2010 as follows. I have refrained from using names to protect the people involved. The CEO stated that everyone is aware that there is bulimia in Lough Foyle, but steps had to be taken to reduce the spread and stress. He asked if anyone would be opposed to closing the entire south side. Two fishermen agreed that this should be closed, but advised that the agency wouldn't get agreement from the rest of the oystermen. It was agreed that the agency would write to all oystermen on this matter. Letters were not written to the fishermen, and the south side was closed without any further ado. Please note that the Loughs Agency's only previous knowledge of Lough Foyle was in managing the salmon fisheries, an infrastructure that they have failed to protect. We don't want the same to happen to our oyster fishery. However, the so-called legislation they have imposed is going to have an adverse effect on the public oyster beds, which will potentially lead to the demise of the public oyster beds completely in the future. The public oyster fishery is our community's and the next generation's future. The Foyle-Carlingford Fisheries Act 2007 sought to destroy this by removing its only protection in Irish law, which was as follows from the 1997 Fisheries Amendment Act. Number 23, 1997, Fisheries Amendment Act 1997, Part 2, Regulation of Aquaculture and Related Matters. Section 8.1. The licensing authority shall not license a person to engage in aquaculture within the limits of an oyster bed or oyster fishery, the property of any person or to which an oyster bed license or oyster fishery order relates, without the consent of that private person or of the person who for the time being is beneficially entitled to the oyster bed or oyster fishery. This act was struck out by Minister Noel Dempsey, and I quote him, "We are back to the original point I made, which was that oyster fisheries in Lough Foyle are public fisheries. They are not owned by any individual or body. Therefore, it is not necessary to seek consent in the manner that has been proposed, and we do not intend to include such a provision in the legislation." Source: Parliamentary Debates, Select Committee on Communications, Marine and Natural Resources, Foyle and Carlingford Fisheries Bill 2006, Committee Stage, 30th of the 1st, 2007. Considering this is still a public fishery, the following questions have to be asked. Who gave the previous Fianna Fáil-led governments the right to forfeit our traditional rights to the Loughs Agency? Who gave the right to the North-South Ministerial Council to pass legislation for the Loughs Agency in this jurisdiction when we are already controlled by the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. This surely is a breach of our constitutional rights when we consider our geographic location in the Republic of Ireland. Other scenarios arise, specifically in the case of MMV Austria, the Loughs Agency's new flagship. It was procured in New Zealand and grant-aided by both governments not to exceed £750,000 sterling in 2008. In the official Hansard Report 2010, the vessel was now costing between £810,000 and £820,000 sterling. However, issues relating to refit were still under negotiation. This vessel was purchased second-hand for £295,000 sterling. The cost of this vessel, according to the Loughs Agency staff, is now near £2 million sterling and still rising. The real answers are required to justify this cost, as everybody within the fishing fleet knows that this boat is not yet in legitimate working order and never will be. The real question is, why was this boat purchased in New Zealand? Surely it should have been tendered for in Ireland, the UK or some other European country. Considering the original budget, we are positive that a new boat similar in build could have been procured brand new within Europe. The Loughs Agency has acted improperly towards the public oyster fishing community and businesses in Lough Foyle. The communities have been held under duress, something which we will no longer tolerate from this agency. We are asking you, our locally elected representatives, to help us get answers. We are seeking your help by asking you to put delegations through your party members in Dáil Éireann and the Senate, so that we may make an appearance in front of the Houses of the Oireachtas to report the wrongdoings that have been enacted against the local oyster fishing community of Inishowen by the senior management team of the Loughs Agency. We are also requesting your support for a full public inquiry into the Loughs Agency regarding the mismanagement of its senior management team. The previous Fianna Fáil-led governments have let the fishing community of Inishowen down. Please help us prevent the same mistakes happening with the new government. We have attached links to this report on the following page to give you further information on the MMV Austria, including a link to our Facebook page which further highlights our plight. If you require a PDF formatted file of this report, please give us your email and we will forward it to you as soon as possible. Before we finish, we would like to state today that we do not in any way recognise this body under the current regime nor any laws which have been handed to them, as we have no faith in the Loughs Agency or its commitment to Lough Foyle. We thank you for your time and welcome any questions the members of the committee have in relation to the issues raised today, which is only a ripple in the pond.